Hello, and welcome to episode 17 of Sarastro's Star Wars painting series. In this episode, we're going to paint Luke Skywalker from Fantasy Flight's Star Wars Imperial Assault. Luke is quite a straightforward miniature to paint, provided we pay attention to some of the subtle tonal differences in his outfit. We'll be painting Luke using the following steps. We'll fill one or two gaps with some green stuff before priming the miniature white. We'll then apply the base colours, followed by some shades, and then the highlights, before adding some finishing touches. Let's begin. For Luke, I found some filling with green stuff was required to cover the join on his back. You can refer to episode 10 for more detail on how to do this. After removing mould lines and priming in white, we're ready to begin painting. I'm starting with the skin, and I'll be using virtually the same colours that we did for Han Solo, which means beginning with the base colour of Bugman's Glow. For the gun and holster, I'm using quite a dark grey mix of black with Mechanicus standard grey. Since the belt Luke is wearing appears to be that of the discarded Stormtrooper outfit from episode 4, we'll be leaving it white. We can also leave the tunic white, since we'll be using a shade to introduce some colour in the next stage. The leg and footwear appears to have a slightly darker, almost khaki tone, so I'm using a 2-to-1 mix of Celestra Grey and Screaming Skull. For the hair, I'm using a base colour mix of 2 parts Mournfang Brown and 1 part Kantor Blue. I'm then going to add a couple of layers of highlight, like we did for Han Solo, starting with a broad highlight using some Steel Legion Drab. I'm going to cover most of the hair with this to help achieve a lighter sandy coloured tone. I'm then adding a lighter highlight with some Tallarn Sand. I'm still applying this quite liberally to produce a blonde finish, although we will be darkening this down with the wash in the next stage. As usual, I'm building this up in a couple of layers. Finally, I'm going to use some Ceramite White to clean up the tunic. Now we're ready to add some shades. For the skin, I'm using Reikland Fleshshade. Next, I'm using some Nuln Oil for the gun, for the holster, and for the belt. I'm soaking a fair bit of this off the belt as I don't want it to be too dark. I'm now going to add a small amount of Seraphim Sepia to the Nuln Oil, resulting in a roughly 4:1 mix. I'm applying this to the tunic, as well as to the legs and feet. We can see that the small addition of the Seraphim Sepia is enough to provide a subtle but noticeable difference in the finished tone between the purer white look of the belt and the sandy beige colour of the tunic. Finally, I'm using an equal Nuln Oil and Agrax Earthshade mix for the hair. An additional layer may be added selectively to boost the contrast. And now we're ready to begin the highlights. I'm going to begin by highlighting the skin, and we'll be using the same colours introduced in episode 16 for Han Solo, except I might go just a touch lighter. So I'm beginning with a reapplication of Bugman's Glow. I'm following this with an equal mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Fleshtone, although you could skip these intermediate layers if you like. Now, still covering the majority of the skin, we can use pure Cadian Fleshtone. We can see how easy it is to accidentally hit the tunic whilst doing this, but I'm not too worried about this as we've yet to highlight those areas. I'm now mixing in an equal quantity of Kislev Flesh and focusing more on the smaller areas of highlight, such as the cheekbones and the nose. And I'm now using pure Kislev Flesh. I've chosen to try out Citadel's new pale skin tone, Flayed One Flesh, which I'm mixing into the Kislev Flesh to provide an even lighter final highlight. This is not essential, however, as simply adding white will achieve a similar result. Once we're happy with the skin, we can move on to the rest of the miniature, and I'm starting with the belt. For this, we can simply use some white scar and build up to a pure white on all of the raised, flat areas, whilst leaving the indented sections of the belt untouched. I'm now going to begin highlighting the tunic using a roughly equal mix of white with Screaming Skull. Hopefully the shade will have done a nice job of shading the dark to mid-tones for us, so we just need to focus on the topmost areas such as the shoulders and tops of the arms, as well as the raised peaks in the fabric. I'm then increasing the amount of white in the mix to produce a second, lighter highlight. I'm going to add one final portion of white to produce a final off-white highlight, but I'm taking care not to come too close to the pure white tone of the belt. For the legs and feet, I'm mixing equal quantities of Administratum Grey and Karak Stone. To produce the next lightest tone, I'm adding some Screaming Skull. Finally, I'm adding a little white to produce the final, lightest highlight, focusing on the knee and raised wrinkles in the fabric. For the black holster and gun, I'm beginning with a highlight of Eshin Grey. I'm then mixing in some Aministratum Grey to lighten the tone slightly. This will do for the holster, but for the gun I'm going to add a few small final highlights with some pure Aministratum Grey. One way of dealing with a heavy-handed highlight is to simply blend it in with your finger. Finally, I'm going to pick out a few highlights in the hair with some thinned Tallarn Sand. We're now ready for some finishing touches. For the eyes, I'm applying a small dab of pure white, followed by a dark grey mix for the centre of each. Some retouching of the surrounding area may be needed. I'm now adding a thin slither of Steel Legion Drab above the left eye to approximate the eyebrow. After a matte spray, I'm going to rebase the miniature as outlined in episode 10. I'm then adding one final touch, which is a coat of thinned gloss varnish for the Stormtrooper belt. And this completes Luke Skywalker. Thank you for watching, and especially if you have liked the video and subscribed to the channel. Feel free to connect with me on Twitter or Facebook for additional news and images of upcoming miniatures, or to share your own work with myself and the community. My special thanks go out to the patrons of all pledge levels who are helping to fund the work that I do. If you would like to help me create more content, then hit the Patreon link, and pretty soon I'll be able to spend all of my working hours producing these videos. Join me again soon as we continue painting miniatures from Star Wars Imperial Assault. Happy painting!